Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. Now, on this episode, I'm talking to two behavioural scientists that have just published a book that is designed to teach people how they can deploy behavioural science in their workplace. And if you've listened to the podcast before, you'll know that human risk is the idea that human decision-making and human behaviour is the largest risk facing most organisations, either people doing things they shouldn't or not doing the things that they should. And the way that I try to mitigate human risk is through the use of behavioural science. So the book that I'm going to explore today, Ripple, which helps people do that, is highly pertinent to the topic of human risk. My guests this time, Jez Groom and April Vellacott, both work for Cowrie, a leading behavioural science consultancy that works with some of the largest organisations on the planet, including the likes of Amazon, Tesco and Sky. Jez Groom is the founder of Cowrie. He's a passionate advocate for the deployment of behavioural science within businesses, and he's been helping companies to build that capability within their organisation for over 10 years. April Vellacott is a behavioural consultant at Cowrie, and she also helps global clients to apply behavioural science within their organisations. She's been studying human behaviour for nearly a decade, holds degrees in psychology and behaviour change, and as you'll find out, has done some fascinating research in the field of facial perception. Both of them are the authors of Ripple, which gives various case studies and examples of how you can deploy behavioural science to achieve changes within organisations. Small changes can have a massive impact. Once we've talked about the book, we then, of course, pivot into the big topic of the moment, coronavirus, and look at some of the dynamics from a behavioural science perspective. I think you're going to absolutely love the conversation. It's some fascinating insights from the book and some fascinating insights around what is going on in the world around us. So I'll leave you with a wish that you and your family and friends are safe, a reminder that you need to wash your hands, and then a plea that you just sit back and enjoy my conversation with the authors of Ripple, Jez Groom and April Vellacott. Jez and April, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Thank you very much for having us.
Hey, thanks for having us.
So how did both of you kind of latch onto the subject and become behavioural scientists?
I've worked in advertising, media and PR for 25 years. And I think I did see one LinkedIn comment that said, I hate people that say they've worked in advertising, media and PR and they've been doing behavioural science for 25 years because they just haven't. And I think I agree and disagree. I think, we've worked on in that time kind of a lot of government campaigns. We worked for the COI. The COI were amazing, I think, in the early stages of behaviour change. And I think it's fair to say a lot of that communication was posters or radio ads or TV ads, generally sort of shouting about what not to do rather than nudging them to do the things that we wanted them to do. But I think that gave me a good insight into persuasion and influence. And it was great, for 25 years, it was amazing. And but I think advertising, after being in it for 25 years, I kind of reflect on it and say, when the third brief for ambrosia custard comes round, it can only be more yellowy, more creamy, or more Devony. And I think that was a time maybe to look for something different intellectually. And that's when I think behaviour change really started to generate some momentum. So that's my background. I'll hand over to April and she'll talk you through, I think, more of an academic background rather than a commercial one.
Yeah, thanks, Jez. Well, my journey with behavioural science started way back at university. So I actually thought that I wanted to go and study maths. So I started off doing math. And then the benefit of being at a Scottish university, so I was at St Andrews, is that you can actually do loads of different things at once. And so I was also doing psychology, and I was just drawn to it way more than I was to solving quadratic equations. So I made the switch to psychology and didn't look back with that, really. So I specialised when I was there in the psychology of facial perception. And so I love to bore people with interesting fact, well, I find them interesting, about what we find attractive in the opposite sex and the kind of the evolutionary psychology behind that. So yeah, and then I parked that interest for a while after graduating. So I worked in the world of media planning for a bit, so kind of similar world to Jez. And then I came back to university to do a postgraduate degree in behaviour change at University College London. And, it's just fascinating stuff. But then the challenge was, well, how do I get to start using this stuff in the real world? And what company is going to pay me to do that? And then I found Cowrie and Jez, and they were doing exactly that. So helping companies in the private sector apply behavioural science to help their customers and their employees.
You guys work together and deploy behavioural science to help clients in a number of different scenarios. I mean, what problems can behavioural science solve?
I think when I first started out, so I think this is my third behavioural science business. I think the first one was kind of a nascent sort of minimal viable product marketing group engine. But then I really worked hard at Ogilvy and co-founded with Rory the Ogilvy Change proposition. And I think one of the things that we looked to do was solve any kind of problem. We used to have this line we used to trot out, which was, if your problem involves people, then we can solve it. If it's a clock, we can't. And I think, I think it was an interesting positioning because we really didn't know, but I think it wasn't as helpful as it could be. And I think it felt like we were jack of all trades and master of none. And I think certainly from my perspective, it wasn't the right answer. So if a client came to us and said, what problems do you solve? I worked hard, and I think we've got to a really good position with Cowrie to identify where we think we can make the most impact, and that is all about the experience that companies create for their employees, so their working environment and how they interact with each other and how they respect each other and how they're motivated and driven, and also as well how they interact with customers and doing stuff that, to be honest, I think there's not a lot of advertising agencies would touch with a barge pole. So we spend a lot of time in contact centres, understanding the nature of conversations, which is fascinating. We spend a lot of time on detail on some things that, again, I think most people would run a mile from, which is how to make terms and conditions and key facts illustrations and application forms actually interesting enough for you to bother to fill them in. And then critically, I think digital, about how we might design kind of these interactions with new technology that are human. And I think human sort of centered sort of design has always been there, but I think it's really lacked empirically evidenced behavioral sort of psychology. So those are kind of the three areas, and we sort of bucket them up into sort of like conversational work that we're doing in business communications, and then work that we're doing with UX and digital. So those are kind of the three areas, and then broadly under the banner of putting science behind exceptional experiences, be it customer or be it employee.
And so for the sort of listeners' benefit, you're basically going in and looking at an example would be if they have to phone a call center. Often you go through laborious processes, pressing buttons, and you get read dull scripts that don't really answer your question. And what you're doing is going in and analysing how that process works from the customer's perspective, and kind of looking at what scripts the call center operatives can use in order to be able to be more effective, more customer focused. Is that the kind of?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly the start point, I think. No one likes those interactions. Everyone gets frustrated by IVR. No one really likes the music. And then when you reach the person, you vent. And I think it's kind of not fair on the customer, but I think we also sympathise with the employee. It's not fair on the employee. I mean, imagine if you were the person receiving venting every 20 minutes through no fault of your own, that people have had to wait for long periods of time, or the systems weren't working properly. So we kind of balance both of those two elements to try and, I suppose, create a better experience. So, if someone's come off the IVR and they have been waiting for longer than maybe they or the business wanted to, then the first thing that the advisor needs to say is, thanks for your patience. And that essentially, I mean, there's some people will continue to vent, but most people are fairly balanced. They're often taken aback to go, oh, wow, And so how can I help you? And I think those sorts of small sort of nudges, I think, we know flick this switch in the human brain to say, I am dealing with a person. I may well be frustrated, but actually there's somebody at the end of the phone that is willing to help me. And that sounds like a good thing. So that's how I progress. And, that's kind of a very, very simple example. We do a lot of technical work about how we talk about things like pension products or insurance products to make sure that people are making good decisions. But yeah, I think that's a good summary.
And that brings us nicely onto the book, Ripple, which is out very, very soon. Probably by the time this podcast comes out, will be out, in fact. And how did that book come about? And what's the sort of idea behind it?
Yeah, so I think there's two things I think that I think we've been really sort of forthright about. Is like, why is now a good time? And if we park the current exceptional circumstances, but maybe look at over a longer period of time, the last 10 years. So I think why now is really important. And then the second point we like to make is why did we write it in the way that we did? And I think I'd just like to say to the listeners that it's been an amazing collaboration. That the stories are most definitely mine, but the words are all April's. She's been an amazing author. So I'll let her answer these two questions about why now, but also why did we write the book in the way that we did.
Thanks, Jez. Yeah, it was interesting because, behavioural science isn't anything new. And pretty much everyone will have heard of it by now because it's in the news so much with how the government are relying on it to inform their strategy for responding to coronavirus. But it kind of started to take shape in the 1970s. So there's been this evolution of behavioural science since then. And the way we see it, there have been kind of three big strides. So the first one was all of this amazing academic work. So people like Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler and Professor Kahneman, all of that, they started to do this amazing work in the world of academia that revealed all of these different mental shortcuts and decision-making biases that we all use on a daily basis. So that was kind of the first big stepping stone. And then we get to the kind of the early 2000s when the book Nudge was published. So this was kind of the next big stepping stone. And this is where we start to see behavioural science being applied in the real world. So it was things like the US and the UK governments applying principles from behavioural science to help citizens make better decisions, whether that's kind of paying their taxes on time or saving more for their retirement. And then you get to the present day, which is where businesses are increasingly starting to apply this stuff in the corporate world. And what we noticed was that there wasn't any kind of how-to guide, any kind of practical toolkit filled with inspiring stories for how to do this in the private sector. And so I think that's where we think Ripple comes in. It's kind of plugging this gap that actually starts to help businesses apply these insights themselves. So we really wanted to democratize the application of behavioral science and so that anyone can start to do it themselves. So yeah, as Jez alluded to before as well, we were really conscious when we thought about how we were going to write the book because we wanted to make it really accessible for people and easy to digest and easy to apply it in their working lives. So there are several things we did. So we chunked it up into really manageable steps. So we know that when tricky things are chunked up into easy stages, we're much more likely to follow through with them and get them done. And we were also really aware of the language we were using. So we wanted to avoid using kind of complex jargonistic terms. And it's been quite a compliment that lots of people have said to us that it's just really easy to read. People seem really surprised that it's a quick and easy read. And then we also were really conscious about the fact that we wanted the way it was laid out to be really easy to process as well. So things like the size of the text, the fonts that were used, using images, things like that. All these things come together to make it easy for people to actually start applying it in their working lives.
I mean, there'd be something really ironic about writing a book about, how to sort of behavioural change and not making the form of it fit with that particular piece, because in a way, what you're basically demonstrating, the product is in itself a demonstration of the power of behavioural science, and you've deployed some of that in the structure and the way that you've put it together.
Yeah, no, I think that was really, really important for us. I think, we talk about democratization of insight, but using things with care and integrity and an ethical framework is really important to us. And we help people on that journey within the book. But yeah, I think one of our observations is that, this real sense of irony that behavioral scientists actually don't practice behavioral science principles themselves. And we just don't understand it. And I think, I don't know why. It feels like maybe using long words, long sentences that nobody else understands apart from other behavioral scientists gives you a sense of in-group, maybe a sense of intellectual superiority. I just think it's really interesting because, within our business, we've got the brightest people, they're smart. But one thing that we just make sure is that they're just incredibly approachable and nice, and they can go about and do good at business and help people in ways which other people understand. And I think that's really important. It's our positioning. I totally understand why other behavioral science businesses may well want to position themselves at uber PhD academic level. And but that's not our business, and that's not, I think, how we're going to approach this.
And the title of the book is I guess obvious, right? Which is that small things can have a big impact. Is that where the name comes from?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let April sort of talk a little bit more about it. But I think we laughed. I think there was a recent conference, I think, for behavioral scientists, and the talk was, we're going to move from a nudge to a double nudge, and we were like, really? Really? Okay. So when we do pieces of work, we're not trying to prove a psychological principle beyond doubt. What we're looking to do is to improve the experience. And I kid you not, we look at these experiences which companies think are great, and we go, there's like 67 different friction points in this 4-minute call. And they're like, really? And then you talk them through it, and then it opens up a panacea of conversations and opportunities to make it better. And but the word Ripple, I mean, I came up with some awful titles, but again, the name Ripple came from April, so I'll let her explain how it came about.
Yeah, I guess we wanted something that encapsulated this idea of, well, what next after nudge? So many people had read the book Nudge. Say, you read it all weekend and you feel super pumped to go into sit down at your desk on Monday morning and start applying it in your job. There was just no clear roadmap for how to actually do that. And so because this book was kind of the answer to help those people, what next after nudge, we just wanted a word which, as you said, Christian, just kind of encapsulated the idea of one kind of small drop in the ocean, or one small pebble can have these quite effortless and far-reaching ripple effects across an entire organization, whether that's amazing returns on interest, or much happier colleagues, or much happier customers.
Yeah, I think it's a very timely piece, as you say, because everybody's sort of heard the terms, but what the hell do I do with this thing? And I love the kind of demystifying it piece, because it's very easy very quickly to get you wade into sort of deep academic pieces which use complex language that actually the ideas often are very fundamentally simple. And I think it's quite refreshing to have something where you can go, I can just pick this up, and it's immediately actionable, in a range of different contexts. Yeah,
no, I think what's really interesting, I think, and specifically about relating to human risk, is that what we're not doing in the book is teaching people new biases or teaching people new behavioral models. What we're saying is, if you want to practically apply this within your business, these are the hurdles that we have overcome, that we can essentially lower the hurdle and make it easier for you to step over, so you can run quicker and faster. And I think one of the things that we found really early on that we talk about in the book is that getting people to essentially try behavioral science interventions comes with some risk. Some financial risk if it involves funding of a certain piece of activity. But the critical one, which I think is really interesting from a human perspective, is reputational risk for doing new things. And those new things may well be very odd, but people are very weird. And I think that's the interesting thing. I mean, we it's interesting. So I think when April was studying, they now reference the famous Babies of the Borough case study, which I was involved with back in the sort of early 2010s. I don't know what that decade is called, but I'll call it that. And but Babies of the Borough was essentially this idea that in the areas affected by the London riots and riots around the country, how could we reduce antisocial behaviour in those areas? And one of the team, Tara, came up with this amazing idea was, why don't we use shop shutters as kind of a canvas to paint something which can act as a social intervention? And that social intervention became babies' faces. So local babies' faces were painted and spray painted onto the shop shutters. So when the shutters came down at night, essentially they could be seen, but they acted as a protective antisocial nudge, where we know that baby schema, so the shape of a baby's face, so the large eyes and the cute rounded face, essentially produces oxytocin within our brains, which makes us care more. And by caring more, it makes us less prone to maybe doing things that harm others. And in this case, it was antisocial behaviour. So what we found was there was an 18% reduction in antisocial behaviour on those streets where the baby's faces sort of came about. Now the interesting thing was, we took that idea to certain stakeholders and they thought they were bloody crazy, So what? So essentially we've had people rioting on the streets, breaking down shutters, stealing trainers and fags and booze. And your solution is painting babies' faces. And you go, yeah. And the babies' faces were painted. We monitored the activity through an ONS data. And yeah, there was an 18% reduction. And I think reputationally, do you want to be that stakeholder or that person in a council maybe, or in a company that says, look, I've got this crazy idea that some weird group of psychologists have come up with, and I want to put my career on the line, my reputation, my pension, and go for it. And people just don't want to do that. Essentially, there's a number of steps that you need to go through to bring on board people such that you can operate at scale with these types of ideas. And we've learned how to do that. And those are the types of tips and the toolkits that we talk about in the book. And it's far better to do like a micro experiment or a nano experiment to prove it works in principle, and then take it to your stakeholders, because the results are essentially indisputable. So I think, reputational risk, I think, for companies and individuals is huge, I think, for behavioral science.
And it's also, I think there's this element of logic, right? And we, in all other parts of business, we deploy logic, and you have to have logic and ration. And of course, as you pointed out, human behavior is often irrational, and we do crazy stuff. And what I find really interesting is that if you look at people in their day-to-day, we all know that we do dumb things, right? We buy things that we don't necessarily need. We pay over the odds for them. We make stupid, just purchasing decisions alone. We make silly decisions on a regular basis, and we are persuaded to buy things that are often against our best interest, and we fall for advertising and.
Yeah.
And so we know intuitively this is the case, and yet you transform it into a sort of corporate environment, and suddenly the rules of the game change. And there you have to be sensible and do things that if you were to deploy them in your own household would seem really weird. And I find it really strange that we sort of become different. We kind of expect people to behave differently in the workplace to the way they behave, in the rest of their lives. And I find that a very interesting piece. And what you're doing is kind of breaking that barrier a bit and going, let's bring some of these things that we intuitively know outside and put them in a different context.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll let April just talk about something we did with Overbury, a construction business, a huge one, a big fit out business, like multi-million-pound contracts, about exactly what you just said, Christian, that rational approaches to reducing risk in construction have been adopted for a long time, but behavioural ones are really beginning to gain momentum. But I'll let April tell the story.
It was a really interesting one for us, actually, because we're not experts in construction worker behaviour, but it turns out they are human, just like the rest of us, and make irrational decisions and are susceptible to nudges, just like the rest of us. As you said, just going about our daily lives, making decisions about what to buy. So just to kind of tee up the story, I mean, I'm not sure how many of your listeners will be intimately acquainted with the workings behind a construction business, but basically, in the UK right now, there are barely any safety incidents on construction sites. But the law is that when you do have one, you have to record it, and so it can be really, really important for these construction businesses to have a completely clean slate on their safety records, because if someone's choosing between two companies about who to hire, they're gonna go for the one with the clean slate. And so you've got lots of different teams working on a construction site. You've got the ground workers who lay the foundations. You've got the guys constructing the walls, and then you've got the fit out specialists. So these were the ones we were working with. So imagine any Swish new building you've been to recently. There'll be like beautiful soft furnishings, fancy lighting, beautiful interiors. So these are the guys that do this part of the construction work. And some of them take risks on a day-to-day basis. So, I mean, imagine you've got one of these. You've kind of got, instead of a ladder to reach the ceiling, you've got these kind of high platforms on wheels, so you can kind of easily move them around. And these guys would maybe cut a few corners when they were doing it. So instead of locking the wheels each time they went up to make it nice and secure and be 100% safe, they would leave them unlocked so that when they came down, they could just push it along. And it was saving them time, but they were taking risks. And lots of these younger guys, they were really fueled by high testosterone levels, and we know from lots of studies that testosterone can increase risk-taking behaviour. And so our guys went in and kind of observed all of this, and they came up with a really wacky solution to kind of try and calm these guys down and make them take less risky decisions with their behaviour. And what they did was they painted the walls of their canteen bright pink. And it was this specific shade of pink called Baker Miller pink. And you might have also heard it referred to as drunk tank pink. And the interesting thing about this shade of pink is that it's been used to calm violent prisoners in jails. And yeah, I don't know if you've got any Kendall Jenner fans of the Human Risk podcast, but she's
probably a few of them out there somewhere.
There's always a few. And she's actually painted her living room wall in LA this specific shade of pink because she thinks it'll calm her down and suppress her appetite. But we were using it on this construction site, and I think it's safe to say they were pretty skeptical about whether it was going to have any effect on these guys' behaviour. But we did this to their canteen, and we also had a reward card scheme. And then there was another intervention where you did a weekly walk around with your supervisor, and you looked out for different unsafe behaviours. So all of these interventions together, including the pink wall, led to a reduction of unsafe behaviours by more than 80%. So very low cost, but potentially 80, yeah. 80. And it also comes back to that thing that Jez was talking about, reputational risk, because I think is it right, Jez, that a couple of people walked out of the project because they didn't want to be associated?
Yeah, I mean, we had the executive sponsor, Tin. He kind of had a lot of challenge in the boardroom about putting this idea into place and investing behind it. But yeah, there were a few members of the health and safety team that took themselves off the project. They didn't think it would work, and they didn't want to be associated.
So clearly not Kardashian fans then, obviously.
Clearly not.
Yeah. But I think this is really interesting, right? Because we all know that risk exists, and we have all, I am sure, done things at home, used a chair instead of a ladder to get to something, and done dangerous, and sort of recognized that we've kind of got away with it. So the temptation to do that is something that we know, and we know from our domestic, people don't, and this is clearly revealing too much of myself, but people don't read instruction manuals. Kind of, if it's not quick and easy to do, I ought to just be able to get on with it. And so using chairs as ladders is a good example. So this risk exists in our personal lives, and we've all done things that have kind of pushed the limits, perhaps, of health and safety at home. So this idea that people turn up in the office and are going to behave differently, I think is far-fetched. So the risk is clearly there. And I find it fascinating that there's people cleave to these traditional techniques, which is we will send them on a training course and we will make sure that they are taught about the physics of these, and it's kind of like, it doesn't matter. We just need to find whatever works and persuades people. And I look at these things and go, why wouldn't you try this? Right? Yeah. Because you're no worse off. And there are lots of interventions where you have to change things that do cost money and do come. But this one, I look at it and go, it's a relatively low risk thing to try. The worst case is it's mildly embarrassing if it doesn't see, and you have massive potential upside for very low cost.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think the critical thing, is when you shift, essentially we talk about micro experiments, and we do those to maybe get the first stakeholder on board. But then when we go to this pilot stage, we have a proofing ladder, if you like. And we talk about a mnemonic in the book. So I'll kind of walk you through kind of the different stages. Is that the first stage is a pilot, and essentially it's kind of having a very controlled, very, I suppose, not so well observed by other people in the organisation, sort of domain, if you like. Where essentially you do a pilot, and if it goes wrong, then it's fine. It's not a huge amount of money, it's not a huge amount of reputational risk. You've not shouted off the rooftops that this is going to change the world because you just don't know yet. And that's kind of the P of the proofing ladder. That's the pilot. But then when it works, so we saw this sort of minus 82% reduction in unsafe behaviours when people were working at height. But the probability of that being due to chance was 1 in 69. So we conducted this in a very, very empirical, scientific way. And that presents some challenges. So how do you observe that people are doing the right thing? And what was really interesting was Pippa, one of our behavioural designers, she had to go up on site onto the 28th floor of a construction site on the south bank of London, which personally I felt challenged by. I mean, she was amazing. And we went through health and safety training. I did it once or twice, but I didn't enjoy it at all. But once it was like 3 times a week on different floors at different times, we were taking samples, but we couldn't tell them we were taking samples due to the Hawthorne effect, that we know that when people are being observed, they change their behaviour to essentially be compliant and do things a bit which should be done. And then as soon as you go, then they revert back to type. And so we wanted to avoid that. So they didn't know; they just knew she was a well-being officer, a psychologist interested in well-being. And little did they know, in her pocket she had a clicker, one on the right for working at height, and we also measured material movement. So people that maybe were moving materials around on trolleys, maybe in not the right way. And it was really important because what we found out was not necessarily on this site. We didn't necessarily see it on this site, on the Overby site, but we'd heard about kind of like this sort of operating sort of model to get around health and safety. And it's quite funny, but it's serious, is when the health and safety high-vis team were walking around the floor, the construction workers would shout out, "Kilimanjaro!" And that was their code for health and safety. 50 meters around the corner, you need to be locking the wheels, working at height, doing all the right things. And then when they come round, they were doing everything right. And then as soon as they're gone, they'd revert back to type. So
health and safety team is coming. So we'll put everything in order so that it looks okay for them. And then they bugger off and we'll go back to the way we used to. So you kind of know what the health and safety team is there for. You know they're sort of there to protect you. And yet you play this kind of North Korean game of let's make it look nice and clean and tidy while they're here. And then when they bugger off, we'll go back. So there's effort involved in that non-compliant.
It's exactly the same when your company sends around this e-learning that you have to do to show that you're complying with some kind of risk procedure. And you just copy the answers of your neighbour. You don't do it properly.
Yeah, because it's a tick box exercise.
Yeah.
So essentially, like getting the observational work sort of done was a challenge, and it generally is with behaviour change. But when you come out with this cast iron case study, say, so we've got a minus 82% reduction with a 1 in 69 chance due to chance. No one is indisputable. Like people kind of go, okay, sounds like a good thing, and you go, yeah, and so then you then get to the second stage of the ladder, is getting recognition for it, which is when you start to take it up to kind of an executive level to say that we're onto something here. And then we start to essentially operationalize it within a particular sort of site or a particular number of sites in this case. So starting to think about, well, is this only relevant for big sites? So you kind of operationalize it within you kind of like the vertical. So that might be a sales function or an operations function or a marketing function, or in this case, it was obviously a building operations function. And that's the first O. The second O is organizationalize, that once you start to get this, and as you say, Christian, it's low cost, no brainer, and people start to get behind it, then essentially it can become widespread across the organization. And then it's really interesting. You get the switch where they go, okay, we've started to fix all of our current problems. You need to teach us how to do this so we can start to do this as part of what we do. But we've now got essentially new things, which is the F, which is future state, which essentially is we've essentially got new ways of doing things. Can we incorporate it into that? And so I think innovation, behavioral science should be baked in from the very beginning. Then, I think often you get to the I, you get in-house capability. So we've not seen it yet. There's about 5 businesses like Bupa, Swiss Re, RGA, you yourself at UBS, where essentially you've got behavioral science baked into the organization, and it's in-house. And then the N is it just starts to normalize. Behavioral science is a normal part of an onboarding of an employee, but also how they conduct and interact. And then the final piece is growth, which flows all the way through, which is if you've got a business that's got behavioral science baked in at the core, it's just going to grow quicker, more simply, and deliver amazing results, which is definitely the truth. So we've seen that with a lot of our clients. And so I think those are the insights that you're going to get. You're not going to get the 151st bias, which is some strange esoteric priming technique about how you get someone to do something by some form of, Himalayan herb smell. It's not going to be that. But what you are going to get is very, very practical steps for you to go on the journey to use the stuff that exists in a very accessible way. And that's why we're very proud of it. I think the feedback we've had so far is fabulously readable. I think the Jules at Bupa just said it's just so different to every behavioural science book on the market right now.
And look, I love this idea as well that behavioural science is a skill set that I think everybody should have, because we're all in the business in some level of influencing other people.
Yeah.
And so I kind of look at it and go, it's about time that we really started to equip everybody. This is not, I think this is perceived as a skill set that is sort of the preserve of certain professions. And I sort of look at it again, in the knowledge economy, we're all on a daily, hourly basis trying to influence other people. And that might be getting them to do something, getting them to not do something. We're communicating, and just even an email is an attempt to influence someone else's decision making. And so I think it's great to have this ability that sort of says, let's break this stuff down so that it's simple. And here's some stuff you can just try and give it a go. Let's demystify it.
I think you're absolutely right, Christian. And everything from how you email your colleagues to how you ask your partner to take the bin out. It can have a transformative effect on your relationships. So, and it's been really gratifying for us as well to see our clients, the more we work with them, start to use it in their emails to us, or even just start to spot it. So when I email one of my clients I'm in daily contact with, and when I email her, she plays a game of spot the nudge, and I can spot all of them coming back to me in an email as well, and it just makes our emails it's just nice to read when you ask someone to do something in a way which, you use reciprocity. So you kind of say, well, I've done this thing for you, so would you mind doing this thing for me? Or, thanking them for something they've done for you, or, framing your request in a way which makes it sound more positive. It just makes your daily interactions nicer. And when I ask my partner to take the bin out, and I know I don't ask whether he could take the bin out, because that's kind of questioning his ability to take a bin bag out of a bin. But I ask him, would you mind taking the bin out? And it's quite transformative how that leads to a much better take-up rate. So,
right, take-out rate, literally.
Yeah.
You just reminded me. I'm due to do the same thing. So when we finish this, I know what I'm up to. Can't let you go without talking a little bit around the interesting behavioural experiment that's going on at the moment in the world, which is the impact of the virus. And clearly that is it's a human-caused dynamic. So from my perspective, human risk in action. But we're having to, we're all being asked to modify behaviour. We've got lots of people trying to influence that. We're trying to think about what it means for us individually. I mean, what observations have you got in terms of how that's going and what we're seeing in that space?
What I can't comment on, I think, is the government work, and I think the work around health. I think what I can say is I think it's amazing the work that I think BIT are doing within government. I think there's some really, really strong work. I think working with UCL as well with their Centre for Behaviour Changes specifically around health. They're working in these exceptional times. And but I think what I can talk about is kind of how we're helping more of our clients. And I think, when we look at communications that has been sent out, it feels maybe 10, maybe 20 years out of date. It feels like, a letter being sent from a CEO that's written by a corporate communications crisis advisor who's maybe 60, 70, years old, is expert in this. And it's kind of a statement of intent to say, don't worry. I know you're worrying. It's spreading. The shelves are emptying. We're doing the best we can. And all of this language just isn't helpful. And even the way that they're designed, they're letters. So they're letters as if they were written on a typewriter from like 1922. It's kind of so we've spent a lot of time in the last 2 weeks helping a certain number of our clients from CEO level down to talk to their employees, their colleagues, and reassure them that they've got a really strong management team that has got their back, that cares, and in order so they can deliver that sort of care to their customers, to help their customers make good decisions. So myself and April specifically have been working sort of within the pension environment. And I think pensions are hard to understand in the best of times. But I think right now people can make some decisions about the pension which aren't going to be good for them in the medium and long term, and definitely in the short term, and definitely in that kind of non-rational, kind of counterintuitive, makes sense now but doesn't make any sense at all under the cold light of day. So we've spent a lot of time redesigning those communications, the words, the images, what we're trying to convey, and then critically, what do you want people to do? So if you want people to go online and not ring, just make sure that the ring phone number isn't so big. It's like, please don't ring us. And then you look at the phone number and it's in size 84 font in block 0800. And you're like, yeah, this isn't helping, So it doesn't mean hide it. It just means get the priority of the messaging right to nudge people to do the things that is in their best interest, and also the companies, because the company wants to help people that can't use the internet, so the people that are in more vulnerable customer group. So we've spent a lot of time doing that very, very quickly. And I think some of it has now sort of been picked up by the press about good examples about how you should do it maybe versus some others not. So I think crisis communication for the new world, I think behavioural science, I think, has got a lot to say about that to get people to adopt new behaviours. I think the media, I think, is going to come under review. I think chasing advertising, ratings for television and clickbait and sensationalising behaviours when they're in the minority actually has made it worse. How to quantify that, I don't know how that can be done, but I've got a sense and intuition that if there was less news stories about shop shelves emptying, then it would have helped, and more about normality and showing more normal behaviour, I think would be good. So I think those are kind of the two elements. I think, April, I don't know if you've got any thoughts.
Well, I think just to follow on from what you were saying there, Jez, is that it's really interesting how the media and the government are using social norms in completely contrasting ways. So, as I'm sure most people will know, social norms are kind of these unwritten rules of social behaviour, and we all have quite a strong desire to conform to what other people are doing. And as Jez pointed out, the media are using them in quite unhelpful ways. So all these pictures of empty shelves with no toilet paper, it's basically saying everyone else is buying toilet roll, you should too. Whereas the government seem to be actually doing a wonderful job in their press briefings of talking about how many people are complying and staying at home, and all the people who have volunteered to help the NHS. So they're actually using social norms in a really, really positive way. And it's interesting how behavioural science is being used to completely different effects, and one of them is much more positive than the other.
And I think what's interesting about that observation, and now that you've pointed it out, as is often the case with behavioural stuff, now that you've pointed it out to me, I hadn't really thought about the sort of the opposing uses of it. But now you point out it's pretty obvious. And what I think is really interesting here is that everybody is deploying behavioral science in this environment. So when I look at the letters that Jez was talking about, I mean, I've received, we've all got this. It reminded me of GDPR, and you get letters from companies you've forgotten even existed. I bought a kitchen table from you 8 years ago, and you're telling me about your coronavirus planning. It's not, what do you want me to do with that? It's not particularly helpful because it's not going to encourage me to buy anything. And, whereas if I've booked a flight or a hotel, I want to know what's going on, or I'm shopping in a food shopping, that's relevant information. And I find it very interesting that we've got a lot of people are communicating and they're not really thinking about what they want their target audience to do with that. And so a lot of this stuff misfires because people are deploying behavioral science without really realizing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always been the case. I think Cass Sunstein has been the sort of champion of choice architecture and sometimes this drive towards neutrality. And I know it's quite technical, but the simplistic way of explaining would be, if you design something either knowingly or unknowingly, so you might arrange some chairs around a table, they will be designed in a certain sort of fashion at the end of it, and it may well drive people to sit together or not sit together. And you might have designed that with intent or non-intent, but be it may, it will change people's behaviour. And I think what's happened is there's been some very, very good uses of people thinking hard about how to elicit and prompt the behaviour that they want, and then some bloody awful ones where people essentially think they're doing the right thing, but they're actually exacerbating the problem. And I think that, for me, is why I think that comes under review. I mean, I think there's also, the risk of companies doing things at this time when people are kind of highly charged and highly sensitive. I think that, this is a very, very human sort of circumstance, as you mentioned. And I think it poses some tensions, I think, within a world that's increasingly becoming automated and losing touch with humans, and then some of the mismatches that can cause. So, I think I had some text from a certain high street retailer about some promotions they had for furniture and clothing that was on sale, that maybe I should rush down to their store halfway through at a time where I was being told to isolate. And this was one of the biggest furniture and clothing stores on the high street. And somebody had forgotten to switch off the CRM SMS system. And you kind of go, I know they've done this unintentionally, but I still feel like they're not on the same page and they're not talking to me as if I'm a human. Had a recent interaction with a technology provider that provides email services that I think on the day that the time that everybody's talking about furlough payments, a word that nobody had ever understood before or knew what it was. People are talking about social distancing, all these types of new terms. Essentially at the times when the economy is in pretty constrained and difficult times, decide to put their prices up, and it's an automatic thing. And I suppose the really disappointing thing, I think, was, going on to web chat to talk to one of the operatives about why they were putting their prices up. They actually said, yeah, it's an automatic thing, as if to say it couldn't be overruled. And the risk these companies have now, I think, is that, with automation and with AI and predictive analytics and next actions, that taking humans out of the process means that they're going to essentially miss out on this human element. And I think that is a risk. In this particular instance, I'm hoping it'll be their downfall. Well, unfortunately, I don't think it will. But I think it was a very, very insensitive interaction, which was doubly made worse with the human confirming it. And it was pretty poor.
Doesn't matter what the intent was. It's how does it feel? What's the outcome? And, we react differently to things in different situations. And as you point out with algorithm, the Uber surge pricing algorithm is a great example. That kicks in regardless of why there is excess demand. So if there's a terrorist incident or a natural disaster, what historically happened, that just kicked in. And it's doing precisely what it's been told to do. And yet the human reaction to that will vary massively according to the underlying circumstances. And so we need that human component, as you say, as a sort of override capability at the end. If we're going to use algorithms, there are going to be times where those algorithms, particularly in a world like we have now, where the world is going to change in unusual ways, and what is appropriate 1 minute in one context may not be appropriate in another. And so I think that's the role of people in an automated world is we still need a massive human component.
Absolutely. You know, I think Thaler did a brilliant piece on shovels after snowstorms and essentially surge pricing in the high street and whether it was the right thing to do, because clearly from a rational economist perspective, there's increased demand, there's a limited supply, so therefore prices should go up. But the overwhelming sense was that was profiteering and taking advantage of people in difficult circumstances. And, you know, I think ourselves as a business, all of our people, we've made a commitment to our clients that we're not going to make any profit during this period. So all of our work is on a not-for-profit basis. We're looking to keep our business running stable for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, however long it is, such that we can all come back to our jobs that we absolutely love doing. And if we have any money left over at the end of that process, we'll give it back to the clients that invested in us during that period, and they can make the decision about how they allocate that to their teams or to the other charities or vulnerable customer groups that they think need more help. It's their call. And yeah, I think it presents an interesting sort of conundrum. I think that the risk for quite a lot of big corporations right now about how they approach and reflect on how they've behaved in this period. I think it's no surprises. I think that Sports Direct, have made the decisions they have. They're now reflecting on them and trying to backtrack. But I think there's going to be some form of reconciliation there. I think Wetherspoons, I really, really do hope that people don't go there. I really hope that people don't work there. It doesn't sound like a very nice company at all. I'm just, aware that low-priced alcohol is pretty attractive to some groups quite a lot of the time. So that's kind of a challenge there. But there's also the retailers. I think if you're sitting in a big supermarket, and I know your staff are working really, really hard, or a big online retailer, and through this period you're employing, 20,000, 40,000, 100,000 people, but you still make millions in profits. I don't think they're profits. I think they should be handed back to the NHS and to the government to help everybody else.
The ethical thing is it's really interesting because you can't not take a position on it, because not doing something is an action. And so we're seeing, I find it fascinating to what you got some companies that are waiting until they're told by the government, for example, stores to close. And yet they sent out emails trumpeting it as a virtue that they were looking after their staff. And you kind of look at it and go, I can smell what's going on here, which is you are basically following government advice. You haven't made a proactive, you've just complied with the law. And you're trying to make a virtue out of that thing. And I think it's really interesting to say companies can no longer afford not to have a position on these things, because people will look at it and will expect you to. And you ought to have a view and you ought to take decisions. And I think there's some really interesting things. And I think the benefit that we have now over previous situations like this, to the extent that we can compare them, is we've got a collective memory. We've got social media that's tracking this stuff. We've got visibility on these things. And employees can speak up in a way they couldn't before. That I think means that the reckoning, if you like, Jez, that you were talking about, I think is coming, because we're not going to forget this. And we've got it and we know it and we're aware it's happening and we know it as it's happening, not just years after the event.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I think what's interesting, is quite a lot of the newer business models that have been incredibly disruptive, more platform based. So you mentioned Uber. I don't know how Airbnb are doing, but I imagine they're not doing very well at the moment with physical distancing. I don't think there's many people popping into people's houses right now, but quite a lot of these disruptive platform based business models, I think will come under a bit more challenge. So WeWork, Uber, Airbnb, and so I think there's going to be a reckoning, I think, on kind of reputation, but also kind of maybe a reflection on maybe they're not so unicorn after all.
So look, Jez and April, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. Before you go, remind us title of the book and when it's available for people to buy.
Thanks, Christian. The book is called Ripple: The Big Effects of Small Behaviour Changes in Business. And it's available on Amazon, obviously, Amazon in the UK, Amazon in the US, and also direct from our publisher, Harriman House. And all the big bookshops like Waterstones, Foyles, WH Smith, you can go online and get it there. Because of the current situation with the world, there might be some delays with physical copies getting delivered, but then the ebook, it will be available from the 31st of March, and that's our official publication date. And we've also got an audio version coming out. So if listening to things is your thing, and I'm guessing it is, if you're listening to a podcast, then you'll be able to download it being read out loud to you by a man with lovely dulcet tones, which, I think that'll be very, very reassuring in these times.
Brilliant. Well, listen, thank you so much to both of you for appearing. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Which brings us nicely to the end of another Human Risk podcast. My massive thanks to Jez and to April for joining me, and to you for listening. If you're not already subscribed to the podcast, you'll find it wherever you get your quality audio content. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Human Risk podcast. Thank you for listening, and above all, stay safe.